Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Garden Robinson, and I'm your host for today's Field to Fork webinar. These webinars are brought to you by North Dakota State University Extension, and we have a special welcome if you are joining us from a watch party. We're celebrating a milestone in 2025. This is the 10th year we've done the Field to Fork series, so we have well over 100 archived. We have reached thousands of people with information about growing, preparing, and preserving fruits and vegetables, and also best practices for food entrepreneurs. All of these webinars from previous years on different platforms are archived, and there's a link on the Field to Fork webinar page. This slide shows the upcoming webinars, and we hope you join us to hear the last one for the year, featuring Carlos next week. The next slide shows the webinar controls. And because of our number of participants, we invite you to post your questions and comments in the chat, not the Q&A box. So ignore the Q&A box. Let's go to the chat, click to open it, and then type in your city and state where you are and your current outside temperature in Fahrenheit. While you're working on that, this next slide provides an acknowledgement. This program is sponsored in part with grant funding from USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, and I will ask all of you to complete a short online survey that will be emailed right after today's webinar. And as a thank you, we are providing prizes to the lucky winners of the random drawing, so be sure to include your complete address, including your city, state, and zip code. And be sure to scroll down to today's date. We have several in that survey. Again, I welcome you to today's webinar, and I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, who's also my friend. Karen Blakeslee is the coordinator of the Rapid Response Center and co-director of the Kansas Value Added Foods Lab with K-State Research and Extension. She has a bachelor's degree in food science and a master's degree in food and nutrition from Kansas State University. Prior to her extension career, she worked in food manufacturing, and one of her roles is teaching food safety in many areas, including home food preservation. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Julie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, great.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome everybody and greetings from Manhattan, Kansas. Glad you could take some time and join us today for this webinar. My topic that I'm going to talk about is obviously food preservation, and I'm going to talk about what I call the toolkit, some essentials that are very beneficial and very useful for doing any kind of food preservation. All right, so let's just jump right into this. First thing to start with, where are you getting your recipes from? There are lots of options these days on where to find recipes for home food preservation, but there are some that are way better than others. What you're seeing on the screen here are some extension resources, which are really all the basis of most of these, and is with the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. It's been around for years, and it has the essentials for home food preservation, especially canning. And then there's all of us out in the extension world. We all have our own little version of these. For example, here on the right-hand side, we have what's called Preserve It Fresh, Preserve It Safe publications on different food items that are preserved. And these go into talking about canning and freezing and dehydrating. Another one that is really beneficial to have in your home library for any kind of food preservation is this one on the bottom left called So Easy to Preserve. This is from the University of Georgia. They also have the National Center for Home Food Preservation. They are, amongst us in the university world, they are the leaders in doing research in this area. And so they have a really great book. If you don't have this book, I highly recommend you get it. And I strongly recommend that you buy it directly from them. I know that there are some ways to buy it that are not off of their university platform. They may not be legit, I guess. So be careful where you're shopping that from. I strongly recommend if you do a search for So Easy to Preserve University of Georgia, you should go right to it. Um, their website, the National Center for Home Food Preservation, is also a great resource, which has a lot of information on it, just like the So Easy to Preserve book does. Some other resources, this blue one here, the Preserving Food at Home, this is from Penn State University. I think it's a real good publication. It's kind of a marriage between So Easy to Preserve and the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. They've done a really nice job putting this together. And then the Ball Blue Book, which has been around for over 100 years. Some of us in the extension world, including Julie, are on an advisory committee for the Ball Company. Actually, it's owned by Newell Brands. And so we work with them to try to make sure that we're all talking the same language, that we're all putting out resources that are tested and researched. And the Ball folks they're doing their due diligence to make sure that what they're putting out is a good product. This book here was updated last year. They took some things out, they added some things in. So this is what it looks like. They also have this book here in the middle, the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, which was also updated last year. So both of those are really quite good. And then our publications that I mentioned earlier, I also updated those in last year. I put the pictures of the Sure-Gel boxes on here because, they have recipes that they provide with their pectin, and they're pretty standard recipes and follow their directions, and you really shouldn't have too much problem with them. We do not recommend that you make up your own recipe and can that, because there's so many parameters that you have not tested to ensure that you're going to be canning it safely. So the best thing to do is freeze those kinds of recipes for long-term storage. Oregon State University has an app that it's now only for the for Apple products, the iOS version only. That used to work on Android devices, but I just found out recently that no longer works. So if you scan this QR code, it'll take you to my website where you can find this link to Oregon State's app that you can download to your mobile device or to your tablets or whatever technology you use. And that might be an easy way for you to get recipes and follow it. And these are based on USDA recipes, I will say that. So might be an easier way for you to source a good, safe recipe. I do want to mention some sources that I don't recommend that you use, mainly because you just don't know if the safety of those recipes has been adequately tested. There's lots of bloggers out there. I appreciate the work that they do, but I caution you on using theirs because you just don't know if their recipes are tested. Same thing with recipes off of Pinterest. Just be careful with that. Old recipe books or even old church cookbooks, be careful about those, because those are a lot of recipes that are passed down, and you just don't know if they're truly safe to preserve anymore. There are lots of recipe magazines, and I see recipes that are put out in newspapers sometimes. Again, they may not be adequately tested or give you the right steps. I saw a salsa recipe in one of our newspapers here one time, and it was a salsa recipe, and they did not even talk about processing it at all, heat processing it, which is really unsafe. They just said put the lids on and call it done. And that was really not wise advice for them to share with readers. Um, so be careful where you're choosing your recipe sources. This picture in the middle, I pulled this one off of Pinterest. This was somebody that's showing how to can bacon. We have no instructions for canning bacon. So, you know, I love the creativity, but creativity can also be unsafe. So, and another thing I want to point out too is up here, just because a food is commercially canned doesn't mean it can be canned safely at home. For example, cream soups like cream and mushroom soup or things like that. There just isn't any kind of safe home canning recipe and directions to do those kinds of things. So um, start with the good sources and you'll be better off in the end. All right. Next thing to think about is your stovetop. And there is a whole wide variety of different kinds of stovetops out there. From the flat glass stovetops like in the picture here on the left, to gas, to the old-fashioned coil burners. So which one do you use? Which one do you have? And how will this affect your canning? Well, the first thing to do is read your manufacturer's instructions. Make sure your stove manufacturer instructions say that you can do canning on their stove top. And this is especially for these flat glass top stoves. I've seen these things crack, and you don't want that to happen because of the high heat and the time that it's at that high heat. Some of these burners automatically shut off. So between that and even today's coil burners, some of those automatically shut off if they get too hot. And so you got to be really careful about that. Gas stoves work pretty much just for everything. So you got to be smart on how you use that. And what type of canner to use on it makes a difference too, which I'll get into here in a little bit. Portable burners, we get questions about using those. This QR code, if you want to scan that, it'll take you to some more information. These are great. I think they're great for saving your stove top to use for the canning process. You know, these portable burners are great for heating up water or cooking jelly mixtures, or say you're wanting to peel tomatoes. You can heat up the water and blanch your tomatoes in there to get the peels off. So it is kind of handy, but which ones do you use? You want to have ones that have a good, solid, strong power source, but using outdoor gas burners, those can be almost too hot. And then it's really hard to control the temperature, the rate of, especially on pressure canning, to control how the pressure canners work. So got to be smart about how you're going to use that. So read the directions, do your homework, and make sure the other thing is that they can withstand the amount of weight, the heat, the long heating times. I have some portable gas burners that I use when I teach classes. I have used it for water bath canning. I haven't been brave enough to use them for pressure canning. Partly because with those portable gas burners, you don't want to run out of gas because you got to have those gas canisters. So lots of things to think about as far as using a portable burner. So canning equipment, let's talk about pressure canners to start with. There's two types of stovetop pressure canners, a dial gauge or a weighted gauge. This picture here in the front shows a weighted gauge canner. The blue colored one in the back shows a dial gauge canner. Pressure canners can also be used as water bath canners. You just don't add the weight on top of it. So it basically turns it into a stock pot. So you can get multiple uses out of it. And a lot of these you can just do regular pressure cooking in these too. So they have multi-functions. So the weighted gauge canners, typically it's a large pot. It's got a rack on the bottom to keep the jars up off of the bottom of the canner. You You want a rack in there. You never want to sit the jars directly on the bottom of the canners or they might crack, which is a mess. So you don't want to do that. The weight on top depends on which brand you buy. This one that is showing here is very similar to one of the weighted gauge canners that Presto sells. Um, it's probably got a gasket with it and a safety fuse and overpressure plug on it. And then the vent and the cover lock is over here on the side. And then the dial gauge canner is very similar to that, but it uses a dial gauge to measure the pressure. The weight on the weighted gauge canner is how you're measuring the pressure inside the canner. It comes in 5, 10, or 15 increments, 15-pound increments. So with the dial gauge, it's more visual to see the numbers on the gauge if you've never used one of those. Which one do you buy? That's up to you. It's your personal preference. And it can also depend on your stovetop too. Another version of the weighted gauge is this one in the left corner here. It's the round disc and it says 5, 10, and 15 on it. And then that sits on the vent. So that's just a brief little overview of the two types of stovetop pressure canners. Now, Presto does make a dial gauge pressure canner that works on induction stovetops, and this could also work on an induction portable burner. I just, again, do your homework on that and make sure that the directions for that burner say it can be done. So this is the number. It looks exactly like a regular Presto stovetop dial gauge pressure canner. It's just got more stainless steel on it to get that magnetic um, reaction between the burner and the bottom of the canner. So, and it's used just the same. So if you have an induction stovetop, this is an option. And as far as I know, this is the only option if you do have an induction type stovetop. So pressure gauge testing is really important for those that have pressure dial gauges. Most of us in the university system have the ability to help you with this testing. We have a tester, a master gauge tester that we get from the Presto company. So that can only test these 4 brands of pressure canners. And it's important to do this because if it's off, you're going to be, and you don't know how much it's off, then you're not getting the right pressure that you need to safely can your foods. So we recommend you do this every year. If it's more than 2 pounds off, I recommend you get it replaced. And there's lots of ways you can get the replacements for these gauges, either directly from the manufacturer itself, but there's also some other options out there for that. Now, all-American canners. This is one I do not recommend you put on top of a stovetop because they are so heavy. And by the time you put the water and the jars in there, then it gets even heavier. And they say do not put these on a glass stovetop. They'll work fine on a gas or a regular coil burner. But an all-American canner is actually a weighted gauge canner. Even though it shows it's got a dial gauge on it, this weight over here, that's what you use to monitor what the pressure is inside that canner. This is just there to show you that pressure's there, and so that when you're done processing, you know when it has depressurized and gone back down to 0, and then it's safe to take the lid off. If you have an old style of one of these types of all-American canners and it has one of these valves on it, they call it a petcock valve, you can get that replaced to get this weight put on your lid in place of that. And if you have this old gauge on there, I'd get that replaced too. Well, we cannot test these gauges with that pressure gauge tester that I mentioned earlier. So be mindful of that. These canners are heavy. They will last forever if you take good care of them. Just know they actually function as a weighted gauge canner. All right. Old pressure canners, if you're shopping at a garage sale or a state auction or something and you see that they have one for sale, be a smart shopper, be and take a look at them. Check the condition of them. You want to make sure it's not warped. Set it on a flat surface and see if it rocks back and forth. If it does that, it's warped and it will never set flat again. And so your jars won't set straight up and down inside the canner. So that can be a problem. Some of them are old brands of pressure canners, and you probably can't find replacement parts for those. So it's not a good bargain in that respect either. Instruction manuals may be hard to find. Um, but if you do find one that looks fairly decent, you know, and you need replacement parts, I do have some places to look for replacement parts. If you click on or scan this QR code, it'll go to my website, and in the bottom right-hand column, I've got a list of resources where you can go to find replacement parts. Oftentimes, it's just best to go direct to the manufacturer to be sure you get the right parts. Know your model number too. That's always important of your canner. Couple new things that are out. This is the latest thing from Presto. It's called a digital pressure canner. And they have done their due diligence on that in creating this appliance. It's only for canning. It is not for cooking. The first version that came out is what they call a 12-quart size. It can do pressure canning and it can do water bath canning. The exception on the water bath canning with this is it's not tall enough to do quarts for water bath canning. So, but there's another option I'll show you here in a second. They have developed this. It's basically like a mini version of a commercial canning system, pressure canning system. They have done their work to make sure that this thing works. Their customer service is very good too. Our North Central Region group has had several conversations with the folks from Presto, and we're pleased with how they've been very diligent about making sure this thing works. And I know several people, including myself, I've had only one little problem, and I contacted them to get there's a small disc rack in the bottom of the canner, bottom of the pot, and they replaced it for free. And so they want this thing to work. Follow their directions. I can't emphasize that enough on how to use this for best success on it. All right. Now, last year they came out with a newer version, a taller version, so that it can water bath quarts. Now, on both of these, on the pressure canning side, it will automatically adjust for your elevation. These two appliances are based off temperature. So, yes, it does build up pressure, but it's actually measuring the temperature more than the pressure. So on the pressure canning side, it automatically adjusts for your elevation. On the water bath canning side, you do still have to add the extra time to adjust for your elevation. Otherwise, these both work the same. This one's just a little taller. If this is something that would work for you, it's an investment, but it may be worth it for you. Plus, it frees up your stove space. You do not have to have your stove for this. It sets by itself. You just got to have a good solid plug-in for it. You can also get a longer power cord for this, in case you can't, reach an appropriate plug-in. So they do have that option now too. So I've used one of these myself, and I think it's pretty cool. I just have to say. And the other thing on this is to always do a practice run with just water in the pot inside of here. And it recommends you do that in the instructions. So you learn how it works and get familiar with it. Our North Central Region group has a publication on pressure canning, which talks about the standard way of using stovetop pressure canners and these electric ones. So take a scan of that, and you can access that publication to learn more about that. One thing I do want to caution you about is to not use smart cookers. And in these, I'm talking these cooking devices like Instapots. While some of these might have a feature on it to can, it's got a canning button on it. The problem with these is what we've learned is they don't reach the proper temperature needed for canning, which can be very scary. So just use these for cooking. That's really what they're designed for. And until things change on this, I'd stay away from them stay away from using these for canning at all. All right. Let's talk water bath canning. So essentially, this is a big stock pot with a rack in it and a lid. It's pretty simple. If you have a glass stovetop, the bottom of that canner needs to be completely flat. I'll show you a couple examples. Use the biggest burner that you have. The outside edge, the diameter shouldn't overlap your burner any more than an inch, so that you get maximum heat into the canner. The stock pot needs to be tall enough so that when you got your jars in there, the water needs to cover the top of the jars at least 1 to 2 inches. If you have a stock pot of your own that you would like to use, you just need some kind of rack. This is the kind of rack you typically get when you buy a water bath canner. But I'll show you a couple options if you don't have, if you can't find this kind of rack to fit your stock pot that you have. So this canner here on the left, this is a stainless steel water bath canner, and it does have a flat bottom. This works very well on a flat stovetop. So again, just make sure it fits your biggest burner that you have. These speckled canners here on the right, these have been around forever, and these have the bumpy bottoms on them, and they even say, the graniteware folks say, do not put these on a flat stovetop because you're not going to get maximum heat transfer between the burner and to the inside of the canner. So these types of canners are best for gas or your standard coil stovetops. If you need to create your own rack for your stock pot that you have, there are some options like this one here, this red silicone rack that fits on the bottom. You could even roll up some foil and create a rack by using that, or take some old canning rings and tie them together with some either like picture wire or something like that to hold those together. Something to keep the jars directly off the bottom. You just don't want them to sit directly on the bottom of the canner. Otherwise, they just might crack. So that's just some examples on that. Steam canning is another option for water bath canning. This is something that we used to not recommend because honestly, we just didn't know for sure if the heat transfer through the jars is equivalent to water bath canning. But thanks to University of Wisconsin, and they did some work with these, and they found that they work well for any water bath canning recipe that has a total processing time of 45 minutes or less. So that includes adjusting for your elevation. If you can see this picture down here, it's kind of like an upside down water bath canner. The bottom part is short. It's about 2 inches, 3 inches high, and the water just touches the bottom of the rack that you put in there, and then you set your jars on that rack, and then the dome covers it, and that's where the steam is. There is a couple holes on the sides of these that allow the steam to vent. That needs to happen so that you know you've got a good amount of steam going. This can be very, very helpful, that way you're not moving around a whole lot of water, less chance for burning yourself. But again, this is limited to recipes with a total process time of 45 minutes or less, which really does cover a lot of water bath canning recipes. And So that might be an option. So you can scan this QR code here to learn more about it. Our North Central region put together a publication on this topic, and hopefully that is helpful for you. The Ball folks have come out with an electric water bath canner. This is the new version that came out a couple years ago. They used to have another version of this, but now they've switched to this one. It can also be used for cooking and steaming foods or dispensing hot beverages or things like that because of the spigot here. One thing that's nice about this upgraded version is the pot can be set on either side so that the spigot can be over here on the left, or it could be over on the right-hand side. The idea is for this to sit next to your sink so that you can fill it with water and then allow the spigot to drain the water back into your sink, so you're not having to lug around a whole lot of water. It's got some technology with it. Again, follow their directions on how to use this. It's a standalone item, just like the Presto pressure canner is, and so it does not take up space on your stovetop. So this might be a nice option. And it can be used for any water bath canning recipe. It's just like using a stovetop. It's just by itself. So this comes in very handy in workshops. That a lot of us extension folks have these, and they come in very handy, especially when we don't have access to a lot of burners on a stove. So some things not to use. And I put these up here because people have done this. I've talked about these pressure cookers here, like the Instapot type things, to not use those. These one-handled pressure cookers that are on a stovetop, these are too small to be used for pressure canning. So these are not to be used for that. Please don't use your dishwasher. You can wash your empty jars, but don't process full jars of food in here. It doesn't even get hot enough to start with. Don't use your oven or microwave. The jars are not built to withstand dry heat. They are tempered. The glass is tempered for wet heat. So jars can crack inside the oven, and then you've got a whole mess that you would have to clean up. Open kettle canning is essentially putting the lid and the ring on, turning it upside down, and then flipping it back side up. We don't recommend this. And sun canning is essentially the same thing, where instead you're setting them outside in the sun for a few days. Very low temperature control here, and this could open up the world of all kinds of problems. So please don't do this. And don't use your slow cooker for processing any full jars of food. You could use this for cooking down like apples to make your apple butter. That's a nice way to do that, but not for processing. And again, I put these up here because people have done it. And this is some examples of what not to do. Some other things, there's a lot of old antique jars out there, these old zinc one-piece porcelain lids. They're not made anymore, and we just don't recommend using those at all. These are great for storing, cotton balls and all kinds of other things, decoration, but we just don't recommend using these at all for canning anymore. Be careful with these old antique jars. Some of them may have a lot of bubbles in the glass, and they could eventually crack. Even if you can get the two-piece lids on them. So it might be time to upgrade and then save these antique jars for decoration. They make great flower vases, I will say that. Let's move on to lids. So since I already kind of started talking about lids, the two-piece metal lid and ring system is what we recommend. Always use new lids. Never reuse these lids. They're only designed to be used once. And the ones that you buy today, they do not, the ball and cur lids do not require preheating. We strongly recommend that you wash them first, but they do not need to be preheated. And I'll show you the reason why here in a little bit. Yeah, there's some other things about this. Hand wash the rings. If you put them in the dishwasher, they're going to rust a whole lot faster. So wash them by hand, let them air dry. When you're putting the rings onto the top of the lids, when you put the lids on the jars, make sure you're screwing it down properly. If you screw that ring down too tight, you could eventually buckle the lid, which is what happened here with this wrinkle here in the lid. You just want to screw that ring down just until it stops. And that leaves just a tiny little gap for the air inside the jar to escape. So, and then the lid will do its thing and seal onto the jar on its own. Um, so, um, on the preheating of the lids, the ball and curve folks, they updated their lids about, I think it was in 2017 that they did this. And a lot of people still preheated the lids by putting them in a pan of boiling water. Well, they found that the lids weren't sealing like they should. And so the Newell Brands folks, they did a lot of testing with both the regular and wide mouth lids and both water bath and pressure canning, and found that many of them, 30% of the pressure can lids, they buckled or didn't seal, or same thing on the wide mouth lids. There was just so much inconsistency that was happening that they found that all you have to do is wash them and use them. That's all you have to do. So there's no definitive advantage to preheating them. If you do want to do that, just put it in hot water. Do not boil them, because that can soften the sealing compound too much, and then they're not going to seal right. So they did that because, it's one extra step that it just doesn't need to happen. But you do want to have nice clean lids, so always wash them in soapy water. Reusable lids, there are a couple options out there for that. This is just one example. Follow their directions on how to use these. University of Wisconsin did some testing with these just to see how they work. You still have to have the metal rings to hold the lid in place. This is a plastic lid with a rubber seal, a separate rubber seal. So they come in wide and regular mouth size. The thing you don't see, and you don't hear that ping, or you can't see any kind of vacuum pulled on the lid because it's a stiff plastic. So follow their direction on how to determine whether the jar is sealed properly or not. And when University of Wisconsin worked on this, they found that really they're only good for about 10 times. And an easy way to keep track of that is take a marking pen and put a little hash mark on top of the lid so you know how many times you've used it. But follow their directions if you choose to use these. All right. Again, our North Central Region group put together a publication on this topic called Put a Lid on It. So take a look at that. You can scan the QR code there and access that publication. Types of jars. Regular and wide mouth canning jars. They range from 4-ounce to half-gallon sizes. I will say that the half-gallon size is only for apple and grape juice. They should never be used for anything else. There are no recipes out there to can anything, at least tested recipes, researched recipes to use half gallons. So apple and grape juice is the only thing, and it states that right on the box. Make sure they're clean. Always take your finger and go around the top rim of the jar. Make sure it's smooth. There's not any nicks or cracks anywhere. Always look at the sides of the jar. Make sure they're not scratched. And use the size of jar that's specified in the recipe, or smaller. Never use a jar bigger than what's stated in the recipe, because if you do, you may not be processing it long enough, and guessing is not always a good idea on the processing time if you decide you want to use a bigger jar. So be smart about that, and use the jar that's specified. We see problems with this happen with salsa. I see a lot of people putting salsa in quart jars. I get it. I know why you want to do it, but there are no recipes out there that process salsa in quart jars, I'm sorry to say. And the reason why is because nobody's done the research on it. So I know that's popular, but pint jars is as high as you can go on salsa. There's color jars out there. The ball folks came out with these to celebrate the anniversaries of these different colored jars. I think they're done doing those out, but you might still see some out in circulation. Those can be used for canning. They are made not just for decoration, but they can be used for canning too. All right. And yet another publication, just so you can learn more. This is our Jar It Right publication that you can take a look at by scanning that QR code right there. Again, you can do a search for the North Central Region Food Safety Network and access all these publications that I've been mentioning. Some other equipment. These four, well, actually three pieces of equipment here are really pretty standard for home canning. Some kind of funnel, some way to measure the headspace. This is a headspace tool that has the little stair steps on it. And then the other end of that tool can be used to free your bubbles out of your jars. And then, of course, a jar lifter to get your jars in and out of the jars, or in and out of the canners, excuse me. So those three pieces, if you don't have a bubble freer, you can use some kind of plastic knife or something like that. I just don't recommend you use a metal knife because that could scratch your jars. You could even use like a sewing tool that has the measuring hem guide, I think is what it's called. Sorry, I used to sew, but it's been a while. But anyway, that's another way you can measure it. But get one of these tools. It's very handy, very, very handy, and you can get two uses out of it. Freeing your bubbles is really important. So using this tool to get down in there and get the bubbles out before you put the lids on is really important. And then, of course, you probably got all kinds of kitchen gadgets that can be used to help prep things and help make this work a little more efficient. I want to briefly talk about fermentation equipment. These are just some guidelines on what to use if you are going to do fermentation, either stainless steel or glass or like the old stone crocks. Those work very well. And then you need some kind of weight to hold it down. This is a fermentation kit that the ball folks came out with a few years ago that has a spring inside of it, and then the plastic lid has a vent on top of it. So it's a simple, smaller version, in a quart jar that can be used for fermentation. So that's just some tips on that. On freezing, there's lots of options for freezing glass. You can even use canning jars, especially the wide mouth ones. I would not use the regular mouth ones because those could crack because of the food expanding during the freezing process. So use what's designated for freezer use, whether it's glass or plastic. Flexible bags and wrapping works very well. If you're using aluminum foil, you would want to put that inside of another freezer safe type bag or wrapping. Freezing meats that's in the store wrapping is not recommended. That's not what that plastic is designated for. Take it out of these before you freeze that and put it in some kind of a freezer bag or container. Of course, freezer paper is great for meat products. Always label things and date them so you know what it is and how long it's been in there in your freezer so you can keep track of that. For meat itself, something that's leak proof, moisture vapor resistant, can withstand freezing temperatures and resist grease and oil and water, easy to label and won't crack or become brittle. If you get your own meat processed, you've probably seen this kind of packaging before. And in this case, it's labeled not for sale because it's for your own use. Vacuum packaging works very well to freeze products. It sucks out the air and really can help store frozen items for a very long time. Dehydrating equipment. Depending on where you're at, I will say here in Kansas, sun drying doesn't work very well because it gets very humid in many parts of Kansas. And so it depends on where you are. But a dehydrator is probably the easiest thing to do. These are just a couple examples of dehydrators that you can buy. These have trays. This white round one here, you can add trays to it to make it more flexible, and you can put more food in it to dry. You can use your own oven if it's got some kind of fan in it, like a convection oven has a fan in the back. Turn that on, make sure that's on so that circulates air. That helps the drying process speed up. Um, so there's all kinds of options for this. What you get is kind of your personal choice. There's all kinds of bells and whistles on these. Make sure it's easy to clean and easy to maintain. If you're doing herbs, air drying might be the best option, and you don't need any equipment hardly for that. You just have to let them air dry. That works pretty well for those. So that's a little bit on dehydrating equipment. What makes a good dehydrator? This is some information. Many of them have a thermostat on them now, so you can adjust the temperature. The optimum drying temperature is 140 for just about everything. If you're doing herbs, a little lower might be better so that you don't overcook them and overheat them. So take a look at that. But there are some out there that just have an on and off switch on them too. Um, so um, those are just some tips for that. An air fryer. I've had a question about using an air fryer as a dehydrator. I don't know if anybody has done any research on using this. All I can say is follow the appliance directions. I don't think I would do jerky in there. Because it's a meat product, that's a pretty high risk product. So uh, you could try it, I guess. I've not done it myself, but I do know that some instruction books for these air fryers do mention that you could dehydrate foods in there. So follow their directions on how to do that. But quite honestly, these air fryers are great just to cook a healthy meal, and there's all kinds of good things about that. Freeze drying. I just want to touch on this a little bit. This is gaining popularity, but there is some food safety issues to think about with this. First of all, freeze drying process does not kill bacteria. It's essentially like freezing food itself to start with. It stops it in its tracks, and then once you bring it back and rehydrate, if there's any bacteria there, it's going to start living again. So keep that in mind. What freeze drying does is the freeze drying machine pulls a vacuum at freezing sub-zero temperatures, and it converts ice from solid to water vapor. And so it pulls out the moisture, but it doesn't shrink the food like regular dehydrating does. So these raspberries here, they almost look like they're fresh, but they're actually freeze dried. And they make them it makes it super dry, removing it somewhere up to 98% of the water. So when you use these, when you store these, you want to make sure you put it in a really airtight package because those foods will soak up humidity in the air. And then once you start to eat these, I mean, like these raspberries, you could eat them by themselves. But just remember, you need to drink some water with them too, so you keep yourself hydrated. So be smart about this. There are some food safety things to think about with these because you still need to be able to keep that machine clean, and still need to handle the food safely also. These machines are expensive. I've seen prices from $3,000 to $5,000 for a home freeze dryer. So you want to take good care of it and use it properly. These are some publications that talk about home freeze drying. This QR code here on the bottom right will take you to a link of a recorded webinar that our North Central region had in February. This was a Dr. Grace Denow from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And this is her specialty, is freeze drying, and she is a wealth of knowledge. And I highly recommend you listen to this because it can give you lots of good information about freeze drying itself, the science behind it, and how it works. Um, so that's just a little bit about freeze drying. All right. I think looks like I am at the end of my presentation. So I've got about 10 minutes left. And if there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
You had a whole bunch of questions. Thank you, first of all.
You're welcome.
Um, just this is a comment. You
Okay.
talked about Sure-Gel, and this person bought boxes of Sure-Gel, and there were no instructions at all in the boxes.
Right. They don't do that anymore. They want you to go to their website, and which I find unfortunate. I wish they still had those inserts in there too. So, yeah, you have to go to their website to get the information. It's a cost saving thing for them. It's less paper and one less step they have to do to get that product made and in a box. So it's all about the dollars and cents these days. But go to their website to look for recipes.
So here is a question, and I've never had this one. Maybe you have. It's about using Country Crock plant butter with avocado oil, which has no dairy in it. And the person was wondering if they could use that to settle the foam on their jelly because they have a friend who is severely allergic to dairy.
Yeah. I think that should work. I mean, you could use even like canola oil or a vegetable oil instead. And I'll tell you that if you're making jams or jellies to sell, the FDA regulations say that you cannot use any animal products in a jam or jelly as a defoaming agent. That's what they call it. So butter cannot be used, but you could use something like a margarine. You could use something like a vegetable oil or canola oil or something like that. You're only using a very tiny amount. Far as I know, the Country Crock should work. I've never used it, but you can try it. It's safety wise, it's not going to affect anything.
Here's
So,
another interesting comment. You were talking about places not to can. And this person said, also, do not can in a bathtub. I actually had a client call and ask what temperature the bath water needed to be
uh-uh.
for their hot water bath. Ha ha.
Let's not go there.
No,
Let's
we
not
get
do that.
we get lots of
Well,
interesting questions.
I've also heard of people using big outdoor tubs and using an outdoor burner or even over an open fire. I've heard of people doing that too. Let's not do that either. There's just all kinds of things that could go wrong.
So this next question's about using Mrs. Wage's mixes for
Yes.
salsa,
Hmm.
and they are asking, can they use quart jars with Mrs. Wage's?
No. And follow their directions. Their directions only list pints. I will say a few years ago that they did come out with some bulk packages of their salsa mix, and it did say quarts on there, and they got in trouble. They got in trouble for doing that, and they switched it all back to pints. So unfortunately, follow their directions. And I know it's 40 minutes of water bath processing time. So minimum. That's
And
without elevation adjustment.
and I will add one thing to that as well. Some people think that Mrs. Wages is kind of like magic,
Mm,
and you can put in whatever you want as long as
mm-mm.
you use it. You do have to follow their directions exactly, how
That's
much
right.
tomatoes and
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Don't add any extra vegetables or anything like because you're going to change the acidity of product if you add more things than what's in their recipe. So just follow the directions. That's what I use their products. I love it. So it's easy and it tastes
Yes.
good.
Yes. I'm you're probably familiar with Weck jars. Those are the kinds with rubber rings and a glass top.
Yes.
Do you have any comments on those?
That's similar to the old-fashioned
Yeah.
flip top jars with the rubber rings. We don't recommend those for canning. Again, we don't know how well it pulls a vacuum in the canning process. And it's really best to not use those for any kind of canning. You can use them for all kinds of storage of all kinds of other things.
Okay. Here's a question about 4-H judging. And I know you do a lot of that work, Karen. Do you recommend that judges taste water bath and pressure canned products? If you don't, do you recommend that they open the lids?
Um, I don't open the lids. I don't recommend doing that, and I don't taste anything for safety reasons, for many reasons. There are a lot of things that you can look at and judge visually on these jars. You can measure the headspace. You can see if there's any kind of foam in there. Always use a flashlight. That's something I always take. I take a flashlight with me so I can really see better inside those jars as to what's in there. Um, for example, if you're looking at salsa, I better not see any tomato peels ground up in there because you're supposed to peel the tomatoes. So there's a lot of things visually that you can judge and still get a good evaluation of the product without tasting it. And the other thing about, if you do open it up, then what's the fair going to do with that open jar of food? Is it going to sit there for a week? That's not a safe idea. Then somebody might take it home and eat it, and that could be a big problem. So you don't want to open up any opportunities for any kind of a food safety risk.
Someone just asked a question about the site with all the fact sheets where you had QR codes. I just popped that into the
Oh,
chat
good.
for
Thank
everyone,
you.
so
Thank
you
you.
can check that out. We have many fact sheets and there are some webinars that are recorded, so check that out. We really worked hard during the pandemic because there were a lot of interesting things going on
Yeah.
in terms of
And
lids.
and on that website too is the list of our 12 states
Yes.
sort resources for our own websites. So take a look at those also.
Yes. So you have instant access to all of the Midwestern states, which
Mhm.
actually we always include the directions regardless of what altitude you're at. So and you probably do too, Karen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
flat here where I live, but we include the mountainous areas.
Well, everybody thinks we're flat here too, but we do have a gradual climb out to western Kansas. So it gets close to 4,000 feet out above sea level out there. So
Oh, not North Dakota, I don't think. Here's another interesting comment, and I don't know if you have a solution. This person finds that when they have dehydrated onions in a dehydrator, it's almost impossible to get the smell out of the racks afterwards, and they have
yeah.
this scent of onions.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know, maybe soaking them in some lemon juice water. I don't know if that would work, or baking soda water. You might try that. That's a very good question. Plastic can tend to absorb a lot of odors. I mean, the same thing could happen when you're making jerky and you get the marinade. Um, Flavors absorbed into the trays. You may just need to have separate trays, have your onion trays and then other trays for everything else. Yeah, you might try the lemon juice or the baking soda and see if that would work.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand the question, so I will give it my best shot. Do you have any recommendations for making bone broth or other kinds of broth at home? Not, I mean, to can it, I should add.
Well, the USDA does have recipes to make meat stock, which is essentially starting from bones and you cook them down. So the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning does have that in there. It's also on the University of Georgia's website. They also have instructions for chicken stock on there too. I'm not sure if that is what you're talking about, but I do know those two resources off the top of my head.
And the person came back in and said that she had received a news release that bone broths, cubes, granules weren't safe.
Um, well, you mean as far as adding like the pre-made bouillon cubes and things like that?
Mm,
I don't know.
I don't know what
I'm
they
not
mean.
sure.
You
I'm
might have
not
to
sure.
follow up with us and we
Yeah,
can do some more looking into your question. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
One last question because we're at the hour. And
yeah.
do you really have to skin tomatoes when you can them?
Yes, you do. These peels can really, one thing about bacteria is they can attach themselves to the skin. And even though you do rinse them off with water, they could still be attached there. So the best thing to do is to peel them. And these tested recipes that we have, they're all based on peeled tomatoes. So it's an extra step, I know, but it is an extra insurance that you are really doing your best to remove any sources of potential contamination.
All right. And I just went off quickly to the national website at Georgia, and I did find their canning directions. It is pressure canning if you're going to make your own stock.
Yes, it is.
Um, so I'll follow up. Could you use that home canned stock to make soup and then recan it to make like there are different vegetable soup recipes?
Yeah, you could probably, I think you could do that. Yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, the main thing there is that these are pressure canned, they're low acid foods. So
that's right.
if I'll bring us to a close, it's 3:01 and great
Yes.
session today, Karen. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Um,
Yes, you're welcome.
and I'm going to respond quickly to this person, or actually,
Yes.
I'm going to put my email in the chat box.
Yeah.
And there
Well,
you
thank
go.
you all for coming today and joining in on this session. Really
Yes.
appreciate your time and attention.
Well, thank you for putting together a brand new talk for us. So we
Yeah, you're
greatly
welcome.
appreciate that.
You bet. Thanks.